At that moment, as Sherlock Holmes balanced precariously on the edge of St. Paul's Cathedral, he realized this wasn't just a chase, it was a deadly game across London's rooftops. The impossible theft. The morning fog hung thick over London's bustling streets when Inspector Lestrade burst through the doors of 221B Baker Street. His face flushed with exertion and disbelief. "Holmes! Watson! You won't believe what's happened at the British Museum. The Rosetta Stone. It's gone!" Sherlock Holmes set down his morning paper with deliberate calm, but Watson could see the spark of interest in his friend's eyes. "Gone, Lestrade? A 3/4-ton granite slab doesn't simply disappear. Surely you mean it's been moved?" "That's just it, Holmes," Lestrade panted, still catching his breath from his rapid journey across London. The guards were at their posts all night. The doors were locked and barred from the inside. The windows are 30 feet off the ground with iron bars. Yet this morning, the Rosetta Stone had vanished without a trace. Holmes rose from his chair with fluid grace, reaching for his coat and deerstalker hat. "An impossible theft calls for impossible methods, my dear Lestrade. Watson, bring your service revolver. Something tells me this case will require more than deductive reasoning." But none of them suspected that within hours, Holmes would be running for his life across London's most treacherous rooftops. What they discovered at the museum changed everything. The scene of the impossible. The British Museum's Egyptian wing stood eerily quiet, with only the whispered conversations of bewildered staff breaking the silence. Where the mighty Rosetta Stone had stood for decades, only 4 metal brackets remained, still warm to the touch. Holmes knelt beside the empty pedestal, his magnifying glass catching the morning light streaming through the tall windows. "Fascinating, Watson. Look at these scratches on the metal brackets. They're fresh, made within the last 8 hours, but notice the pattern." Watson examined the marks. "They look almost deliberate, as if someone had the exact tools needed to remove the stone quickly and quietly." "Precisely. But more intriguing still," Holmes pointed to the floor around the pedestal. "No drag marks, no wheel tracks. No evidence that the stone was moved across the floor at all." Lestrade scratched his head in confusion. "Then how in blazes did they get it out of here?" Holmes stood and walked to the tall windows, examining the iron bars that had protected the museum for over 50 years. Suddenly, his eyes widened. "Gentlemen, I believe we're dealing with a thief of extraordinary ambition and skill. These bars have been cut from the inside and carefully rewelded. Our criminal was already in the museum before the theft took place. But how did they—" Holmes's analysis was cut short by a commotion from the street below. Through the window they could see a figure in a long, dark coat sprinting across the museum's courtyard, a leather satchel clutched tightly in one hand. The chase was about to begin. The pursuit begins. There. Holmes pointed at the fleeing figure. "Our thief!" "Lestrade, secure the museum." "Watson, with me!" They raced down the museum's marble stairs, their footsteps echoing through the grand hallways. By the time they reached the street, the mysterious figure had already gained a significant lead, darting through London's crowded morning thoroughfares with remarkable agility. "Holmes, he's heading toward the financial district," Watson called out, struggling to keep pace with both his friend and their quarry. The chase wound through narrow alleyways and busy marketplaces. Street vendors dove aside as the 3 men pushed through, sending carts of goods tumbling in their wake. But their target seemed to know every shortcut, every hidden passage in London's labyrinthine streets. "He's no ordinary thief, Watson," Holmes observed as they ran. "Look at his movement, military precision, perfect knowledge of London's layout." This was planned down to the last detail. As they rounded a corner into Threadneedle Street, their pursuit took an unexpected turn. The figure ahead stopped suddenly, turned to face them with a slight bow, and then did something extraordinary. He began climbing the sheer brick wall of the Bank of England building. "Impossible," Watson gasped, but Holmes was already analyzing the situation. "Not impossible, Watson. Ingenious. Look at his hands. He's using some sort of climbing apparatus. This thief has come prepared for aerial escape." Within moments, the figure had reached the rooftop and disappeared over the edge. Holmes didn't hesitate. He found a drain pipe and began his own ascent. What happened next defied all logic. Above London streets, the view from the Bank of England's roof revealed London as few had ever seen it, a vast maze of Victorian architecture stretching to the horizon. with church spires, factory chimneys, and grand buildings creating an urban landscape of extraordinary complexity. "Watson, stay below and coordinate with any police you can find," Holmes called down. "I'm going after him." The rooftop chase began in earnest. Holmes could see his quarry leaping from building to building with impossible confidence, using some sort of mechanical device strapped to his back that allowed him to traverse gaps that should have been deadly. Holmes had no such advantage, only his own agility, intelligence, and desperate determination. The chase led across Fleet Street, with Holmes leaping between newspaper offices and printing houses, the sounds of the bustling city far below creating a constant backdrop of urban energy. At one point, he miscalculated a jump and barely caught the edge of a building with his fingertips, hauling himself up through sheer force of will. "You're quite persistent, Mr. Holmes," the figure called back, his voice carrying clearly in the thin air above London. "But you're chasing shadows!" "Perhaps," Holmes shouted in return, "but shadows have substance when illuminated by truth." The mysterious thief led Holmes across increasingly dangerous terrain. They traversed the peaked roof of St. Bride's Church, balanced along the narrow parapet of the Old Bailey, and leaped across the terrifying gap above Ludgate Circus. But Holmes was gaining ground. Then the chase took a deadly turn. The Cathedral Gambit. The pursuit reached its crescendo at St. Paul's Cathedral, where the thief began ascending the great dome itself. Holmes followed, climbing the external stonework with desperate courage, knowing that one slip would mean certain death on the stone steps far below. "You don't understand what you're interfering with, Holmes," the figure called down as they climbed the curved surface of the dome. "Some treasures belong to more than just one nation." "And some thieves," Holmes replied, pulling himself up another few feet, "belong in prison regardless of their philosophical justifications." At the pinnacle of the dome, beside the golden cross that crowned London's greatest cathedral, the chase finally came to its climax. The thief turned to face Holmes, and for the first time, the detective could see his adversary clearly. He was a man of middle years, with the weathered face of someone who had spent considerable time in foreign climates. His clothing was well made but practical, and the mechanical device strapped to his back was revealed to be an ingenious system of cables and springs, a primitive but effective personal flying apparatus. "Professor Marcus Whitfield," Holmes said with recognition, "the archaeologist who disappeared in Egypt 3 years ago. I should have known." "Very good, Holmes." "Yes, I am Marcus Whitfield, and I've spent those 3 years learning that the British Museum's collection is built on centuries of cultural theft. The Rosetta Stone belongs to Egypt, not London." "Noble sentiment, Professor, but theft remains theft, regardless of historical context." Whitfield activated his flying apparatus, preparing for a final escape attempt. But Holmes had one last surprise. The detective's gambit. "Before you attempt that dramatic exit, Professor," Holmes said calmly, even as they both balanced precariously on the cathedral's dome, "you might be interested to know that you've been chasing a decoy." Whitfield's eyes widened. "Impossible. I have the authentication documents right here." He reached for the leather satchel that had seemed so precious throughout their chase. "Documents that I replaced this morning while you were scaling the museum walls." "Did you really think I couldn't deduce your plan from the evidence you so carelessly left behind?" Holmes pulled out his own leather portfolio. "The real documents are here, Professor. Your elaborate theft, your aerial escape route, your philosophical justification, all for nothing, but the Rosetta Stone is still exactly where it's been for decades. What you saw this morning was an optical illusion created by carefully positioned mirrors and the early morning fog." "The museum curator is a friend of mine, and we've been expecting you." Whitfield stared in disbelief. "You mean this entire chase was necessary to ensure you were caught in the act of attempted theft, with witnesses, evidence, and absolutely no possibility of claiming innocence? You see, Professor, while I sympathize with your concerns about cultural ownership, I cannot permit criminal methods in service of even worthy causes." The sound of police whistles rose from the streets below as Lestrade's men surrounded the cathedral. But Whitfield had one final desperate move. The final leap. "You may have outwitted me, Holmes," Whitfield said, his hand on the activation lever of his flying apparatus, "but you haven't caught me yet." With that, he launched himself from the dome of St. Paul's Cathedral, his mechanical wings extending as he glided out over the London skyline. For a moment, it seemed he might actually escape, soaring above the Thames like some fantastic Victorian invention come to life. But Holmes had anticipated this as well. As Whitfield descended toward the river, believing himself free, a network of police boats appeared on the Thames below, their positions carefully coordinated in advance. More importantly, Holmes had calculated the exact trajectory of Whitfield's glider and had positioned officers at the precise point where physics would force him to land. Elementary aerodynamics. "My dear Professor," Holmes murmured to himself as he watched Whitfield's inevitable capture unfold far below. The descent, Holmes's own descent from the cathedral, was considerably more conventional. Using the interior stairs, while Lestrade's men carefully retrieved Professor Whitfield from his unscheduled landing in the Thames. By the time Holmes reached street level, the archaeologist-turned-thief was sitting in police custody, soaked, defeated, but remarkably philosophical about his capture. "I must admit, Holmes," Whitfield said as water dripped from his elaborate flying apparatus, "that was the most extraordinary chess game I've ever played. You anticipated not just my moves, but my motivations, my methods, and even my escape route. Professor, anyone who could devise such an intricate theft plan, complete with aerial reconnaissance and mechanical flying apparatus, deserved equally intricate countermeasures. Your crime was ingenious. My solution simply had to be more so. But the case held one more surprise. The unexpected resolution later that evening. Back in the comfort of 221B Baker Street, Holmes surprised Watson with an unexpected revelation. "You know, Watson, Professor Whitfield wasn't entirely wrong about the cultural implications of the museum's collection." Watson looked up from his evening paper. "Holmes, surely you're not suggesting—" "I'm suggesting that justice and law aren't always identical concepts. Whitfield's methods were criminal, but his concerns were legitimate." Holmes pulled out an official-looking document from his desk. "Which is why I took the liberty of contacting the Egyptian Cultural Ministry during our aerial pursuit." "Holmes, what did you do?" "I facilitated a conversation between the British Museum and Egyptian authorities about establishing a cultural exchange program. The Rosetta Stone will remain in London, but accurate copies will be created for Cairo, and several important Egyptian artifacts currently in British possession will be returned to Egypt as part of a broader cultural cooperation agreement." Watson smiled. "So Whitfield's crime actually accomplished something positive?" "His crime accomplished nothing, Watson. But the issues he raised in such a criminal manner deserve to be addressed through proper channels. Sometimes a case teaches us that the law and justice, while related, are not always the same thing." A knock at the door interrupted their conversation. "Come in." "Mrs. Hudson." But it wasn't their landlady who entered. It was Professor Whitfield himself, now clean and dry, accompanied by Inspector Lestrade. The final twist was about to unfold. "The professor's freedom, Holmes, Watson," Lestrade announced. "I have some rather unusual news. Professor Whitfield has been released on his own recognizance, pending trial." Holmes nodded. "I thought that might happen." "Professor, please take a seat." Whitfield settled into Watson's usual chair, looking simultaneously grateful and confused. "Mr. Holmes, I understand that you testified on my behalf to the magistrate. After I tried to commit a major theft and led you on that dangerous chase across London's rooftops. Professor, you committed no actual theft. The Rosetta Stone was never moved. Your aerial pursuit was certainly reckless, but no property was damaged and no persons were injured. Most importantly, your actions, while misguided, were motivated by genuine concern for cultural justice rather than personal gain." Holmes handed Whitfield a cup of tea. "The magistrate has agreed to suspend charges provided you perform community service. Specifically, you'll be consulting with the British Museum on the ethical acquisition and display of international artifacts." "You mean I'll be working to accomplish legally what I tried to do criminally?" "Precisely. And you'll be using that remarkable flying apparatus of yours to assist in architectural surveys of London's historic buildings. The Metropolitan Police have expressed considerable interest in your aerial reconnaissance capabilities." Watson laughed. "Holmes, only you could turn a rooftop chase into a job interview. Elementary, my dear Watson." Professor Whitfield's skills were never in question, only his methods. Now those skills will serve justice rather than subvert it. As the evening settled over Baker Street, the three men sat in comfortable conversation discussing archaeology, aerodynamics, and the complex relationship between law and morality. Outside, the lights of London twinkled like earthbound stars. And somewhere in the distance, the bells of St. Paul's Cathedral chimed the hour, a reminder of the extraordinary chase that had brought them all together. "You know, Holmes," Whitfield said as he prepared to leave. "I never did ask. How did you know I would choose the cathedral dome for my escape route?" Holmes smiled. "Professor, you're an archaeologist with a passion for ancient civilizations and a flair for the dramatic. St. Paul's Dome is the closest thing London has to the pyramids of Egypt. Where else would you make your final stand? The case of the rooftop chase was closed, but the friendship that grew from it would last for years to come.